I've run a trading post on the Coldwater Creek Road for 31 years, and I've seen a good many things a man doesn't forget. The summer of 1884 gave me one of them. That was the summer Orlin Vass decided his niece's grief was an opportunity, and the summer a quiet stranger walked into my post and made him regret the idea before the noon bell rang. I'll tell it straight, the way I saw it. Delia Marsh came to Coldwater Creek in June, after her father Bernard passed of the fever. Bernard had been a good man, a dry goods peddler who built a one-room claim east of town on 12 acres of grassed-over creek flat. He'd run up a modest debt at Purcell's mill that winter, $140, and when he died he left Delia the land, the debt, and no one else. Her mother had been gone 8 years. She had no brothers, no cousins within 3 territories. What she had was a straight back, clear gray eyes, and the kind of quiet composure that made men who should have helped her decide instead to take advantage. Her uncle Orlin was her father's half-brother. He'd come up from the south the week of the funeral wearing a new hat and a sympathetic expression, and within 10 days he'd found a judge in his pocket and filed a motion to collect the mill debt against Delia's labor on the grounds that the land itself was in his name, which it was not, a fact everyone in Coldwater Creek knew and which the paperwork Orlin had produced was vague enough to contest. But Delia had no lawyer and no money for one, and Orlin had both, and so on the 3rd Saturday of July a notice went up on the board outside my trading post, over my objection, announcing that the contracted labor of one Delia Marsh, seamstress, would be offered for competitive bid to settle outstanding debt of $140. I want to be careful how I say this. It was not a slave auction. The law called it a labor contract. What it was in practice was a man selling his niece's next 3 years of work to whichever man in the county wanted her most cheaply, and the man Orlin had already arranged to win the bidding was a cattle operator named Creech who had been watching Delia's 12 creek flat acres since Bernard first filed on them. Creech wanted the land. The labor contract was the mechanism to get it, because once she was bound to his place for 3 years, the claim would lapse. I didn't like it. Half the men in the county didn't like it. But Orlin had his judge and we had our discomfort, and that is often enough to keep decent men from acting. The auction was set for 10 in the morning. By 9:30 I had 8 men standing in front of my post, most of them there to see what Orlin would try to get away with rather than to bid. Creech arrived at 9:45 in a clean shirt and stood at the left side of the board like he was already measuring for the new fence. Orlin arrived behind him with the paper and a smug certainty that the thing was settled. Delia came alone. She had walked the road from her claim in a dark blue dress, her hair pinned, carrying nothing but a small leather satchel, her sewing kit, I learned later. She stood to the right of the board where a little shadow fell from the eave, and she looked at neither Orlin nor Creech. She looked at the creek. Her face was composed and still in the way that a woman's face goes still when she has decided she will not give the men watching her the satisfaction of seeing her break. I watched her and felt ashamed of myself and everyone present. The stranger came in at 10:05. I hadn't heard a horse, and I didn't know then how long he'd been in town. He was somewhere around 40, lean-built and trail-weathered, in a brown canvas coat that had seen considerable use. He wore a plainsman's hat and boots that were good quality but not new. He carried no rifle visible, only a belt gun, and he walked with the easy deliberateness of a man who had never in his life been in a hurry because he was in a hurry and didn't want anyone to know it. He moved to the back of the small crowd and stood with his arms at his sides and read the posted notice from where he stood. Orlin began his presentation. He had a voice he used for business, higher than his usual register, the words clipped and formal. He laid out the debt, the legal mechanism, the terms of the contract. 3 years of labor. Room and board provided by the winning bidder. Transfer of service to begin Monday next. $100, Creech said, before Orlin had finished. That was the signal they'd agreed on. Creech opened low so that Orlin could speak of the debt amount and reset the floor, and then Creech would come back in and close it. The debt stands at $140, Orlin said, exactly as scripted. $140, said Creech. And he put his thumbs in his belt and waited. There was a silence. I felt it in my chest, the particular silence of a wrong thing about to be ratified because no one has the will to stop it. $200, said the stranger from the back. Creech turned. Orlin turned. 8 men turned. The stranger was reading the notice again, or appearing to. He didn't look up. $200, he said again, as if clarifying for someone who hadn't heard. His voice was flat and quiet and put me in mind of a man reading figures from a ledger, no heat, no theater. Just a number stated as a fact. Orlin recovered first. Sir, the bidding is for contracted labor, not. I know what it's for, the stranger said. He reached into his coat and produced a wallet, and from the wallet counted out $200 in bills and held them between two fingers without extending them. I'm bidding on the contract. $200. You said the debt is $140. That covers the debt and leaves $60 to the woman for her inconvenience. He looked at Orlin for the first time. Unless you'd like to argue with my arithmetic. Creech said, 300. The stranger didn't blink. 400. Creech's jaw moved. 5. 600. A sound went around the crowd that was not quite laughter and not quite anything else. I saw two men exchange a look. I saw Delia, at the edge of my vision, turn her head from the creek for the first time. Creech was red in the face. $700. 8, said the stranger, and he didn't raise his voice a fraction. Orlin put a hand on Creech's arm. Something passed between them. Creech shook the hand off and said, $1,000. The stranger put the wallet away. He reached into the other side of his coat and produced a second wallet, thicker, and from it counted bills without haste and held up the stack. 1,200, he said. And I'd like to stop there, not because I've reached my limit, but because I'd prefer to settle this before the noon meal. The woman owes $140. I am tendering $1,200 to settle it in full, with the remainder to go to her, $860, as her own money, free and clear. No contract. No service obligation. No lien on her land. He looked at Orlin. Do you want to continue? Orlin was very still. He understood, I think, that something had gone badly wrong with his morning and he was trying to find the seam in it where he could get a grip. The winning bid acquires the labor contract, he said carefully. That is the. There is no labor contract, the stranger said. Not anymore. The debt is paid. He stepped forward and placed the $1,200 in my hands. I was the nearest neutral party, and looked at me with gray eyes that had the particular quality of a man who had been poor once and knew the weight of money and spent it anyway when the thing warranted it. Hold that for Miss Marsh. The $140 to Purcell's mill, the remainder to her account at your discretion. He looked at Delia then. It was a brief look, 2, 3 seconds, and what was in it was not sentiment and not self-congratulation. It was the look of a man who recognizes something and is careful not to make a performance of the recognition. You're free, he said. Walk where you like. Then he walked into my trading post to buy flour and coffee, as if the whole of it had been a minor errand on his way somewhere else. His name was Calhoun Prest. I learned that from the bill of sale he'd signed once, property, not a person, a land transaction he'd recorded here 2 years prior. He was a land agent who worked the Northern Territories, which meant he spent much of his year alone on horseback and knew the value of things the way a man knows it who has had to calculate carefully since childhood. He'd started, as I heard it later from him directly, sweeping floors for a freighter in Hays City at the age of 9 for $1 a week and worked his way up through every honest job a frontier offers to a boy with nothing but his hands and his stubbornness. By 40 he held clean title to 400 acres in 2 counties and had the kind of reputation that meant men paid him to settle boundary disputes because both sides trusted him more than they trusted each other. He stayed in Coldwater Creek for 3 weeks. The stated reason was a land survey he needed to complete east of the creek, which happened to take him past Delia Marsh's 12 acres on a daily basis. The first time he stopped, it was to mend a fence section that had come down in the August heat. He did it without asking and was gone before she came out. The second time, he stopped because his horse had thrown a shoe and her claim was the nearest place with a hitching post, and he borrowed her hammer and did the shoe himself and left a length of good rope coiled on her gate post that she hadn't asked for and didn't refuse. The third time, she brought him water while he was nailing down a loose board on her barn sill that had been working free for 2 months. You don't have to do that, she said. I know it, he said. He took the water and drank and handed the cup back. Why do you? He considered the question with the same flat seriousness he'd applied to Orlin's auction. Because it needed doing, he said, and I was here. She looked at him a moment. That's not a full answer. He looked back. No, he said. It's not. I know what happened after that, the way any man knows things in a small town, from pieces, from what people say and don't say, from the small observable facts that accumulate like coins in a jar. I know she cooked him a supper that Thursday because I sold her the extra cornmeal and he bought the salt pork. I know he came back from his survey one evening and sat with her on the porch steps until the stars came out, and that neither of them seemed to be in any hurry about anything. I know that Orland Vass left Coldwater Creek in September and was not invited to return. Creech kept his cattle operation and his ambitions to a more discreet radius after that. I know that on a Wednesday in October, Calhoun Prest came into my post and asked me where a man went in this county to file a statement of intent to marry. I told him. He thanked me with the same economy he applied to everything else and went to do it. I know that Delia Marsh, when she heard the news, said nothing to anyone for a long time. Then she went to her bureau drawer and took out the money Calhoun had paid into my care, the $860 she had not yet decided what to do with, and she counted it out not as a woman counting what she owes, but as a woman counting what she has. They married in November, at the claim, with the creek running cold in the background and 2 witnesses from town who were glad of an excuse to celebrate something decent. She kept the land and kept her name on it beside his, and in the spring they broke new ground on the east quarter that doubled what Bernard Marsh had filed on. Calhoun reduced his northern surveys to the months she could ride with him, and the months she couldn't he stayed close. I tell it because it's the kind of thing a man sees once and measures the rest of his life against. The auction was supposed to be about a debt. It was, only the debt Calhoun Prest settled that morning wasn't Delia's. It was the debt the world runs up against anyone it writes off too early. He'd been written off once himself. He knew what it cost and what it was worth to cancel it. That was enough.